Good morning and welcome to this episode of MBA Banking Buzz. I am Joe Witt, your host. Happy Halloween to all of you. It looks like today we're getting a rain-snow mix. Hopefully that all clears out so the little kiddos can get out and do their trick-or-treating tonight. My guest on today's show is Therese Kuvaas, MBA's Senior Government Relations Manager. Before my conversation with Therese, I wanted to give a couple updates on some legal matters that we've been working on at the MBA. First, you might recall that the MBA has filed a lawsuit against the FDIC over its UDAP rule on represented checks. That case is currently on appeal to the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals. The MBA is appealing, so we had the first chance to present our arguments. Our first brief was filed back on July 25th, and it was really good. It clearly laid out our arguments, leaving the FDIC in a tough spot. Then 1 week later, 3 different groups filed amicus curiae briefs in support of our position. Their briefs were also very well done and well coordinated to make sure they covered different aspects of our case. I want to thank the ABA, the Missouri Bankers Association, and Shazam for taking the lead on these amicus briefs. We are also grateful for the other state bankers associations. Every single state association in the country signed on in support of our lawsuit, which was amazing. Next step was the FDIC filed their response brief on September 20th. It wasn't all that great. It failed to address many of our arguments, and the responses they did make were pretty weak. We then had the last word in a reply brief that we filed on October 11th. That brief too was really solid. The appeals court will now decide if they need to hear oral arguments on the case or whether they have enough information in the briefs to make their determination. We should hear back on that decision soon. We remain very confident that we will prevail in this matter. Winning this lawsuit will be good for this specific issue, but it will also be good to send a message that we're watching the agencies. There are now 7 separate lawsuits against the federal banking agencies for regulatory overreach, and there could be at least a half a dozen more. These agencies are clearly out of control. Second, the MBA recently wrote an amicus curiae brief in a case on behalf of one of our member banks. The case was an agricultural lending case that involved grain fronting. Grain fronting is a type of fraud where the farmer who grows the grain has someone else sell the grain to hide the proceeds from his lender. In Minnesota, there is strong law that indicates that the grain buyer is liable for this type of fraud because a buyer of farm products takes the grain subject to the bank's lien. The bank won that case at the trial court level, and the grain purchaser decided to appeal. The MBA joined the lawsuit as amicus at the Court of Appeals level. The bank won again at the appeals court, which was great. The grain buyer decided to appeal the case to the Minnesota Supreme Court, which has the ability to either take the case or not. The Supreme Court denied the request to hear the case, which means the lower court decisions stand. That result was absolutely perfect. The law is now crystal clear in Minnesota. It's a buyer beware situation, and grain buyers are on the hook when they purchase grain in a grain fronting scheme. All that is really, really good news. Now a quick commercial. The MBA is looking for help on the subject of financial literacy. We have put together a survey, and we are looking for strong participation from our member banks. We know the banks do quite a bit of work on this subject, and we need your response to the survey to compile the data. Look for that survey on our website, www.minnbankers.com, or contact Carla Bush at the MBA offices. Thank you in advance for your support on that survey. Now, let's visit with today's guest, Therese. So, Therese, please tell us about how you got started in politics.
Good morning, everyone. I actually took the other glasses off because I can't read anymore after being at the MBA for 20-some years. Apparently, I've aged, as has my eyesight. I got started in politics. I graduated from UW-Madison in 1999, and when I moved back to Minnesota, my mom made a comment. She's like, maybe you should, get involved in Young Republicans and do some networking. And the election of 2000 was my mom's first opportunity to vote. She became a U.S. citizen in 1999. So at that time, we decided to get involved in some of the campaigns in 2000. So we worked on some of the presidential campaigns. This was back when direct mail was still stamped instead of just run through postage machines. So I worked on the 2000 elections, and then in 2001, I started as a legislative assistant at the Capitol. And I worked there for 2 years. And so I worked there during session for a couple legislators, worked on a lot of legislation, and then worked on some special elections in the fall of 2001. And I worked on Governor Palente's campaign in 2002. So that was my first couple of years in politics.
Yeah. Then you joined the MBA in 2003.
I did. I joined in the March of 2003. Again, Palente winning in 2002 was a huge upheaval to kind of the administration and kind of jobs. Every election, every time there's an election, jobs are on the line. If a House or a Senate switch majorities, there's a bunch of people will end up losing their jobs that were in the majority. A lot of people will end up gaining jobs because you have to staff up in those House and Senate majorities. When you switch administrations, we obviously went from the Ventura administration to the Palente administration. There was a huge change because obviously he had to appoint all the commissioners and he had to appoint his whole staff, which just kind of had that domino effect. So back in 2003, Margaret Bessel left, and I had gotten to know Judy Cook, who is our contract lobbyist, because the legislator I was working for was a healthcare health chair. And so I met Judy, and that's kind of how I ended at the MBA all those years ago.
Absolutely. And yeah, we've had a lot of success over the years that we've been working together. What were a couple of the bills that you worked on that were most satisfying to you as a lobbyist?
Well, it's funny, as I was like looking this one over, I really started thinking about 20 years, and you gauge successes in very different ways. There, you can either choose to look at the successes as to which bills you pass become law. You look at which bills you can kill, and then there's that kind of that medium, which is how do you fix bills, make them more palatable, and that's oftentimes what we end up doing at the legislature, which is how do we make a bill more palatable. It's funny because you sit there and you look at which bills over the years. We've gone through the financial crisis, and that was a huge undertaking of working groups and passing numerous bills, and those were very consensus bills, needing Governor Palente to veto only one bill in those years. And those were just kind of really hands-on deck. Everybody at the MBA, I think, Tess, and at that time, Steve Johnson and yourself and I, we were all in working groups over the interim. I think one of the ones more recently that's probably one of the ones that I think was one of the best successes was in 2020 during COVID. The MBA kind of took the lead on the senior financial fraud bill, which allows for banks to freeze those transactions, to allow time to investigate and make sure that those transactions by a senior are legitimate and not fraud, because we were seeing so many times that seniors were coming into the banks and they were taking their money out, and there was no way of really stopping. And I think at that time, banks were freezing transactions, but they didn't have those protections. And that's what we were able to do that session. And it was one of the last bills in a remote environment that we were able to pass. And it's one that I think we continue to hear from the Department of Commerce. I still get calls when they're looking for, contacts within some of our member banks, bankers reaching out to the Department of Commerce, because the Commerce Department really wants to work with us on this one as well. But I think, one of the things that's the most fun is actually killing bills. When you can actually kind of really get in there and that these are really bad ideas, killing a bill can be just really satisfying. So I think that's one of those things that, it's harder to pass a bill, but it's easier to kill a bill because you only need, you just kind of have to have that good policy reason for not having it go through.
Absolutely. And, that's always our first line of defense. It's kind of a, make sure that nothing evil happens to the banks. That's always our starting point. And then if we can also get something done positively, that's a bonus.
And legislators think that they have great ideas, and, and they come in, some come in with really good intentions, and you have to explain to them why their ideas aren't as great as they think that they are, and what the repercussions are.
Absolutely. And they also don't understand the already existing laws that are on the books. At the state level, we run into that all the time, where something that they want to regulate is already regulated by federal law. So we got to make sure they understand that. And the other bills we got done recently were very positive too. I mean, at a time when the business side of our state wasn't getting a lot of positive change done, we were able to do that when we passed the bill on the audit requirement and the part-time branching. I think that bill was the only bill that a business industry group got passed was that in 21 or 22?
That would have been in 23.
Excuse me, 23.
23.
I think it was the only bill that was passed by an industry group.
Yeah.
So we were pretty proud of that one, that we were able to get that done. It proves that we're able to work with both sides of the aisle, proves that when you make good arguments, you can get policy done. And that was very satisfying too. Absolutely. So when you look at our success, we like to say that we not only work hard, but we also get results. And not everybody does. There are groups at the Capitol who are there, but they never really seem to get much done. So what are some of the most important reasons that the MBA has had success over the years?
Well, first and foremost, it's relationships and it's education. The MBA is committed to our advocacy. We are committed to being at the Capitol. We invest in it, and we have the relationship side, we have the technical side, and relationships are by far the most important part of lobbying and being up at the Capitol. After every election, so after next week, we will look at which legislators are brand new. There will be probably 20 some that are brand new at least. I think last time around after a redistricting year, there was 60 new legislators. And we go in and try and meet with every legislator that will meet with us. We have found in the last couple of years that there are more and more legislators on certain sides of the aisle that are not willing to take the time to meet with lobbyists. And when we go in and meet with a legislator, and we also meet with all of the chairs, and we meet with all of the minority and majority leaders. We really try and get in there and kind of understand and kind of give them an introduction to banking, because for the most part, 99%, there's a handful that may have some banking background, but nobody really understands banking, and you don't expect them to. But part of it is you kind of learn when you're in these meetings what their banking stories are. And they all have some kind of banking story, whether it's a family banking story, whether it's somebody that they met at the doors, whether it's positive, negative. We hear everything. And I also have learned over the years, you kind of gauge a lot of information from whether it could be an interchange swipe fee issue, because they had one of the legislators had a Sears franchise. And I was like, well, this would be the obvious author if somebody wanted to push a bill against us. And so you kind of take a lot of that information from there. But also you learn in those meetings as to kind of which bankers in their community they really know. And we really take advantage of that, because bankers are our best advocates at the Capitol. Coming to the bank day at the Capitol, which next year it's on February 11th. The registration should be open next week after the elections. But that is a great opportunity to meet those legislators, whether it's building the relationship, whether it's just kind of maintaining it. One of the stories I really like to talk about, which is, we look at Congressman Emmer. Congressman Emmer started as a House member back in 2005. He won a special election. We went to a meeting with him in Delano, was one of our first grassroots meetings. And just kind of that relationship that we've grown with him in the last 19 years. When he went to Congress, he got on financial services, and now he's number 3 in the whip's office. And just kind of having that those relationships, and just never knowing which legislator is going to be where at any point in their careers.
Yeah, it's interesting to see that. You never can tell. We've seen the opposite of that too, where we meet somebody and we think that they're going to be a high flyer, and they really don't do much. Yeah. But then you get an Emmer who obviously, like you said, has gotten into an incredibly strong position, and our relationship there has definitely paid off.
And so relationships, but also education. The education side. When it's we have such great legal expertise at the MBA, not only within the MBA, but also our member banks. We have a lot of lawyers within our banks that give us valuable information. So whenever we get a bill, we run these bills past so many attorneys that really do understand this stuff, and being able to go back to a legislator and give them hard and facts, why this bill is good or why it's bad or what tweaks need to be made. whether it's in these meetings or whether it's testifying, it's, we have the best.
Yeah, that's been super valuable. We're fortunate to have 3 attorneys on staff, which can we can all jump in and help with that. But we're not practitioners either. So we've formed a network of relationships with attorneys that are practitioners in the various areas, whether you're talking about foreclosures, whether you're talking about garnishments and levies. We can read the books and understand what the words say, but it's really nice to get practical experience from our friends, either through member banks that have their own legal staff, or just our network of attorney friends that we have who have been good to us over the years. And that really is helpful. It's one thing, again, to be able to read the words, but when you have actual experience, it's really, really helpful. So that expertise comes in very handy, whether we're analyzing bills, whether we're drafting bills. It comes in really handy, or testifying.
Yeah.
When people really want to know the ins and outs of something, we've been able to chip in really well and do that testimony, and it's been great.
And lastly, aside from, as important relationships and education is, it's being there, being at the Capitol. And we are at the Capitol every day, whether it's in meetings and in hearings. But oftentimes when the House and Senate are sitting on, they're on their 12-hour days, just being in the halls of the Capitol, it's knowing the staff, knowing the other lobbyists, just having those relationships within the Capitol. I've learned so much valuable information just by sitting on a bench in the Capitol, because people will walk around and just start having conversations. And so that's where you find a lot of information. So being there is what you have to do.
It is, and there's just no substitute for being there and having those conversations. We've cut off so many bad ideas before they even get started by being there, and it really is. It's absolutely helpful. You can't quantify that, but the number of times people say, "I'm thinking about this," and we're able to just cut it off before they even draft a bill.
And that's on the good and the bad. We've also found legislators that want to be helpful and really try and be helpful, and sometimes their helpful is not helpful. And so we're sometimes just like, nope, we're okay.
Pump the brakes a little bit.
Yep.
Sometimes that's how we can be most effective, is to get that fixed before it even becomes an issue. So Minnesota is currently a blue state, with the Democrats having the trifecta in our state government. We've seen basically every combination of that. We've seen situations where there's good balance. We've situations where Republicans control everything, where Democrats control everything. And it's over the years, you just see these cycles come through. One of the things that we like best is balance. What are your thoughts on having balance, and why do we kind of like that?
I like to tell everybody, I'm like, I like divided government for my mental health. And we've watched this. We watched this in Minnesota, with just being fully blue. We see our counterparts in other states that are fully red. Balance is just necessary. It's just for good government. It really requires thoughtful dialogues. We found the last 2 years that it was just really easy to push a lot of legislation through really quickly and say, we'll fix it later. And then you get to the end of session and nothing has been fixed. And now we have to, go back and hope that eventually in divided government you can find a fix. But in order to really, government is set up to go through all of the checks and balances, to go through the drafting process, to go through a hearing, to have it vetted on the House or Senate floors, and to go to conference committees. And what we're finding is that it's just easier just to throw everything in omnibus bills, hear things in one body and not the other, and really just kind of not make the fixes. And so you have to have that, just to really be able to vet it, because, and the comment I made the last couple of years is, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And really good policy needs to be discussed. And we are just not finding those discussions in the last couple of years. We have been able to stop some things in the last couple of years because we've had really good arguments, and because we've had really good authors, or we've had really good legislators that have been able to really talk about those points. But really, it's just for every citizen in Minnesota, just having that ability to slow down.
Yeah, and I don't think the average person understands how challenging it becomes when they do those massive bills. They used to do a different omnibus bill for different sections. And this last time, when they rolled every single omnibus bill into one, and nobody even had a chance to read it before it was on the floor, that is not good government.
No.
Whether you're for or against the policies that's included in those massive bills, it's just really not good government.
And it requires a lot on the MBA, on other lobbyists, on our contract lobbyists to really go through all those bills because they can be huge. And, if you look, we have ABA that looks at bill tracking, and they just assume that all these bills have died because the bill number in the system doesn't move on, because it doesn't track that it has been moved into another bill. So having numerous sets of eyes on every bill is what we've had to do in the last couple of years, and thinking that something's okay and then finding out afterwards. And so we are going to have some cleanup on a couple of things next year as well, just because there are things that you think that you caught, but there's still some little things that there's unintended consequences when you move that quickly.
Absolutely. And that gets back to the balance issue as well. If you don't have a give and take and you don't need to compromise, not only does the policy suffer, but the process does as well. If there's nobody that has the ability to say, let's slow this down. Let's not roll all these bills into one. You're ignoring rules, you're ignoring deadlines, you're ignoring, if without balance, you just don't have that opportunity to do that. And that again, just creates more work later on, when everybody just rams everything through at the end. So, a lot of times when we think about our government relations program, we think about you sitting at the Capitol in the wintertime. But for us, government relations isn't just working during the session, right?
Correct. Once session gets done, Tess and I work on the legislative summary so that we're able to get all that information out to you, what passed the last session. So that often gets done in the summer. Depending on whether it's an election year or a non-election year, we kind of look at, this year being an election year, we're meeting with a lot of candidates, meeting with a lot of, committee chairs, meeting with other legislators. We're always, and other lobbyists, because the lobbyists start looking at what legislation they're looking at the following year. So we're always kind of having those conversations. And so really those relationships and a lot of coffees and a lot of lunches and a lot of breakfasts. But we kind of, it's going out up to Perham this year and meeting with legislators up there, but just kind of getting out on the road and really kind of having those connections. And then it's not only on the state side, it's the congressional side as well. We try and meet with every congressional member as well. So we just recently met with Congressman Stauber, we met with Fishbach, and we met with Congressman Finstead recently. And so just kind of having those conversations, just so we're aware and not blindsided when session rolls around. So
we had a real nice meeting with Representative Craig as well. And Representative Angie Craig was great. She ended up signing on to one of the bills we wanted her to support as a result of that meeting. Grateful for the work that we did, but also we had a really good group of bankers there, like we do at all of those meetings you're talking about, and hearing directly from those constituents is so important. So the MBA manages a state and a federal PAC. What's the purpose of that as we're looking at what's happening with elections these days?
So we have the MnBank State PAC and the MnBank Federal PAC. Both of them are regulated and reported to on a regular basis, either to the Federal Election Commission and the Minnesota Campaign Finance. So we follow all the laws that are required by both of those. Elections are expensive, and they happen way too frequently. Whether it's a 2-year House race, whether in Minnesota it's state senates every 4 years, and then U.S. senates every 6 years. So elections are just getting more expensive. But the MnBank PAC we utilize it to really support our friends, to support banking-friendly, business-friendly candidates, legislators that are running for office. Again, we have very strict rules on how much you can give to a candidate, to an elected official. And so this is kind of also the timing. We meet with every legislator that we give money to. We also meet with candidates that oftentimes have bankers at those meetings as well. Just kind of understand where they're looking at, what their campaign entails. But we also look at the timing. There's limits on what a legislator can receive, when they can receive it. You cannot receive PAC dollars during session. So you kind of have, a sliver of time in the beginning of the year. And so, but they're only allowed X amount of money. And so we often try and get in early with some of those friends of ours, committee chairs and stuff, because we're very cognizant that, we can't give money to them later. But we also support other friends as well. And we'll get into that kind of, again, we're a major trade group. we really like to make sure that we are supporting. And again, at the federal level, we work with the ABA on kind of which members we're giving to congressionally as well.
Excellent. And, as one of those major trade groups, we made a decision a number of years ago that if we had the ability to make some donations through the association itself, we would do some of that. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that decision and what you're doing with it.
And we work really closely with the business community. We've been members of the Coalition of Minnesota Businesses for decades, since they started probably over 20 years ago. But there's also newer groups too, the United for Jobs Coalition, there's the Minnesota Private Business Council. And we work with these groups through collaboration. Sometimes it's on legislative side, sometimes it's on election side of things. Just really having the dialogue with those groups, kind of, where the polling at, who we should be supporting, what people are hearing. And so we've been able to help support those causes over the years as well.
Yeah, and that really feels good. Like, we are a major trade group in the state of Minnesota, and we work closely with the chamber, and I have a peer group there. And it just feels good knowing that we're supporting some of those folks that are
on both sides of the aisle.
On both sides of the aisle that are stepping up and helping out the business community. So for people like us who like balance, what are you looking at the state election side of things coming up here next week?
Well, so the Minnesota Senate is not up for election this year. They are not on the ballot. However, there is one special election in the west suburbs, in the Orono, Minnetonka, Excelsior area. So right now we are back at a 33-33 tie for the Minnesota Senate. So that will, with Kelly Morrison running for Dean Phillips' congressional seat, that is definitely going to be a very expensive race. We're already up to $1.3 million spent on that race. So that is where all eyes, especially on the Senate, are. As for the House, we're at a 70-64 majority Democrats. They have had the majority now for 6 years. But you have to flip 4 seats. And, where those 4 seats are, you have to flip 4 seats to get that divided government, but you also have to hold on to every other seat. So we've kind of been watching a lot of the polling. There's probably 2 that will definitely flip, but you have to hold on to everything. We are hearing that there is the possibility of a 67-67 tie, which could just throw, if you have a 34-33, a 67-67, and then you look at the governor's office, and if the Harris-Walz ticket wins, the governor's not up for another 2 years, but with Walz on the ballot, if Harris and Walz win, that just all eyes will be on the governor's office, because that will, that will just have a whole trickle down effect. We will have, Peggy Flanagan moving up to governor. Reading yesterday, she will have to reappoint all of her commissioners, so we could see changes in the administration. That means if she wins, if he wins, she moves up. Lieutenant governor it's the Senate president. So the Senate president moves up to the lieutenant governor. And right now that's Bobby Joe Champion. And so Bobby Joe would then be moved up. Well, then if the Democrats win that seat in the western suburbs, now we're back at, 33-33. So then you have some really slow beginning of the session because you're back at 33-33. And so just kind of watching what the dominoes could be. And just kind of, there's always that outlier that there's a possible, there's a court case on a senator in Woodbury and what ends up happening with her court case. So that's some of the stuff, U.S. Senate is definitely one we're watching. There's 2 Senate, it's predominantly Democrats that are on the ballot this year. We have 2 that should be flipping. So, it's a 51-49. So that could definitely flip one way, and 220-212 Republicans in the House. It's all eyes are on Tuesday night. So Wednesday morning, and probably not for a couple days, will we really know what the results are as those ballots come in. But I think what I was reading is there's a lot of people that'll be taking mental health days next Wednesday.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting election, that's for sure. If you haven't already voted absentee, make sure you get out on Tuesday. Make sure your vote counts. So, Teresa, thank you very much for joining me here today. I really appreciate your insights, and thank you for all you're doing at the MBA here on behalf of the banks. We sure appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Happy Halloween.